In this video, I'm going to show you how to script a MySQL database. This is a life-changing software developer skill that if you don't know how to do it, you're going to be just blown away when you figure out how easy it is to be able to create databases using database scripts or automate the dropping and creation of database and insert and tables and test data. This comes in very important, especially when you get into unit testing, where you want to be able to test your application. Your application has a database, and you want to be able to quickly turn around the database and put it in a known state after your tests have completed. So let me show you what we're going to do, and then I'm going to go into detail. Here I have, well, first off, some discussion on the tools I'm using. I'm using a Mac, big old Mac, right? And I'm running MAMP Pro. And MAMP Pro gives you Apache, MySQL. It's just a really convenient package. So I use MAMP Pro. You can just use MAMP Amateur, just the regular old base version of MAMP. You don't need MAMP Pro. I use MAMP Pro because I host a lot of my production websites locally, so I can do development on them before I push them up to production. And it's just a neat package, right? So it comes with phpMyAdmin, which is running on Apache, and this is the tool I'm using. So I'm using phpMyAdmin to graphically interact with the database. And so that's where you'd start. I'm assuming, at least the assumption in this video is that you're not great with SQL. And you'll probably initially flesh out your database, but you want to convert that database into SQL scripts that you can then automatically execute. So I'm going to show you that process. And to do that, I just say I have this home inventory database. It has one table, items. And right now, items isn't populated. So let me go ahead and run the scripts and show you what they do. So there's no items in the database. I'm going to just do /initialize database and then come back here and refresh. And now I've got my items in my table. So I just inserted a bunch of test data. So I have a home inventory database. It has one table called items. This is a very simple database just for demonstration purposes. And there's a database user. All right, so let's go to privileges. I have a home inventory, a home_inventory user. Okay, so I'm going to drop the database. Let's go up here to databases. I'm going to drop this database. Yes, drop the database. Why? Because I walk through the valley of the shadow of death and I fear no evil, because I have database scripts to recreate this database. And then user accounts, I'm going to drop the home inventory user. So come down here, remove selected accounts, go. Okay. Now the accounts that are left, these like here, they came with MySQL, but Swodog, that's account for my login on my computer. So if you look here, this is a iTerm2 terminal, and it's running bash. So CLEAR, and you can see that my login for my computer is Swodog. And the reason why I have this account in the database is because from my login, I want to be able to just type MySQL and have it log in automatically without any passwords. That's the way the scripts can execute. So if you were running this on Git Bash in Windows, I think the account when you're on that Git Bash terminal is ODBC, but I'll probably take a look at that later. Now, Whatever your login account, you want to add that login account. So yours will not be SWODOG unless you happen to have been a surface warfare officer in the U.S. Navy at one point in your life, which is what SWO stands for. But whatever your login username is, then you need to create an account. So whatever shows up, like if you're trying to execute the SQL scripts from a command line and the login shows up as, whatever, that's the account that's created here. So I'm not going to delete that because I need that account, right? You would create that ahead of time anyway. But now the home inventory database is gone, which means all the tables and all the test data, and the user account is gone. So let me go ahead and return to the bash window here, clear the screen, and execute the scripts. It gives you a report. It says, hey, dropping the database. Now, if any errors occurred, they would be written to the console and to a log file. So I can cat all those log files. If I do a directory dir, I've got my commands aliased here, right? So, I got create tables log. I have a DB version initialized database. So I have a DB version. We'll get to that in a second. That's a folder where I'm keeping the initial versions of the scripts. The initialized database shell script, which I just executed, and then a logs directory. Let me cat the logs directory. Let me cat all the logs in the logs directory. And so that's what got written to the logs, right? So the creating the database got written to the create database log. This is a timestamp which I add to the entries in each of those logs. Okay, so not only is it writing the output to the console, it's also writing it to a log at the same time. So I'll show you how to do that as well. So now that I've executed those scripts, let's refresh phpMyAdmin, and voila, there's the home inventory database. There's the items table, and there's all the test data. That's what we're going to do in this video. Okay, so after I've executed these scripts, I have my database back in there along with the test data. So again, I'm going to drop the database manually because I don't want to execute the scripts, right? So I'm going to assume that this is how you'd start. You're going to start from scratch. Click on the home inventory. You don't have to use home inventory, right? But that's the scripts. Now, you'll be able to download these scripts from my repository. I'll give you a link if you want to play around with them. So I'm going to drop this database. But, you can go in once you figure out what's going on. You change stuff, you edit the database, you can change, once you figure out how to do this, right, you will be so happy. Okay. And I'm going to drop the user account. Home inventory. Okay. Now I'm not using any passwords for these accounts because password storage is tricky. Especially if you're beginning, right? I'm not saying don't be secure in your database, but you don't want to accidentally commit a password to your GitHub repo if you're using Git for your projects. That's no, right? You'll get flagged for that. So anyway, a lot of database access is not necessarily based on passwords anyway. It's based on your account, right? Like, in the enterprise-wide scheme of things, an account would be granted. You would log into an account on a network, and your username would be granted access to make database changes, right? So that's not all the case. That's not all the time, but that's usually what's going on. So I'm avoiding the password issue, right? Because I don't want any accidental commits to the database. So that's the reason why. So clear the screen. Now I have my database is gone. I still have my regular account username, so I can actually execute the scripts, and so I have a clean database. And now I'm going to change. So I'm going to go to a new project. I'm going to use Visual Studio Code to actually, create the scripts right? I'm not creating the scripts from scratch, but I'll show you here in a second what's going to happen. Okay, so I'm going to open a new folder, which I've already created. I created a folder in my development called databases and a new home inventory. So I'm just going to click in here, and then that's fine. Home inventory. All right, now this project has nothing. Okay, then I'm going to say, yeah, trust the authors. So there's home inventory, there's a database folder. Now I'm just going to work on the database piece, right? No application accessing the database, but just the scripts. And these scripts are bash scripts for the execution of the SQL scripts that you're going to create. Now, the first thing I do when I start off here is I'm going to create a new folder underneath of database. And I'm going to call it DB version 1. Now, the reason I do this is because when you're developing, or not so much during development, but you're going to have an initial version of this database. Now, when you're developing, things will change, right? But eventually, you'll put things into production, and then you're not going to mess around with that database, right? Once a database goes into production, there's a whole lot of making sure that you're not screwing things up, right? Going into your development efforts. But as you develop, you're going to be your application will evolve. People will ask for new features, and you're going to want to create like a version 2 of the database. Now, the version 2 scripts would be like alter table, adding tables, deleting tables. But in the meantime, you're going to have to figure out what to do with the data that's in the database. And that's like an extract, translate, load, right? You're going to be doing some data manipulation in order to preserve the data and change the data and populate the new database structures. But there's a book called Refactor by Martin Fowler. I think that's the name. I'll put a link in the description below. That kind of goes through how you refactor your code. How do you refactor databases, right? That's a whole thing. Okay. Anyway, I'm going to have this DB version 1 folder, which is where the scripts are going to go. And then I'll have an initialize database script. And then I'm going to have a logs folder. So another folder where I'm going to put logs. Oh, I'm sorry. Lowercase logs. And this is going to be in the database folder as well. Okay, move. So I have a DB version 1 folder, and then I have a logs folder, nothing in there. It's just that when we create the database, we're going to be writing output to the console and to database logs for each of the scripts that we're going to have. Now, what scripts are we going to create? So essentially, and this is not the end-all be-all, right? So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to create a new file called drop database underscore .sql. There's going to be nothing in this script right now, right? We're going to add stuff to it here. And then you're going to want to drop the user. You don't necessarily have to drop the user, but let's say the user changes over time, then you're going to want to have a drop user. I'm going to put a drop user in there, new file. Notice these are SQL scripts here. Another one, new file. So then we drop the user, we drop the database, we drop the user, and then we're going to create the database. Okay. Then we're going to create the user. Well, yeah, we create the user. New file. Again, I'm just laying out the different things that the scripts that we're going to need, and we'll populate them here in a bit. New file, create tables. And then one more, we're going to insert test data. And this is probably the most helpful, is inserting the test data automatically. So those are the essentially the scripts that we're going to end up with. We're going to drop. Well, you know, when we call them, we're going to have another. I'll just go ahead and create another file, but this is at the database level. So new file, initialize database. And this is a shell script. So we're going to have to give that execute permissions, and we'll do that in a bit. So execute database. This is going to be a shell script. So shebang bash, right? We can just go ahead and write that in there just to get us started. And hit command save here. Okay, now let's go ahead and create the scripts. Now, if you were a database god or goddess, right, and you knew SQL command, you know, what is it, command language and query, there's different parts of the SQL languages, right? I'm assuming you're not one of those, right? You're just a regular working stiff trying to figure this stuff out, probably a newbie, probably experienced, but you're not really a database person. So you don't just sit right down and create like tables and foreign key relationships and primary key. You don't know all those commands off the top of your head. And the good thing is you don't need to be that person. All you need to know is how to create the initial database using some graphical user interface tool. I'm using phpMyAdmin. You create the database and then you export the script. Okay, but then you're going to have to do some manipulation of that script in order to then break it down into these individual scripts. So let's do that and you'll see what I'm talking about. So, excuse me, I'm going to create a database. So go up here and say create. So we're on the databases, right, top level. Here I have, so I want to create a new database, right? So when you go to databases, you've got this little thing up here, create, right? So database name, home _ inventory. And just leave that UTF-8 general CI create. Now we have a database. So we can select, okay, now it says it goes right into the create table. So I'm going to create 3 columns in the table. One will be called ID, that'll be the primary key. And then the item name, and then the count. Okay, so let's see here. So we're going to do, so the name of this table is items. And we can have, I think we only need 3 columns. So you could have more, whatever you want, right? You do what you want. Hit go. Now, I have 3, it gives you 3 columns here that you can populate. So ID is the first one, item is the second one, and count is the third one. Now the type for the ID will be int. It'll also be auto increment, so that when we do an insertion into the database, it'll automatically increment the primary key, which is fine. And item will be varchar, and count will be int. Now the length of int doesn't matter. Varchar, I'll say 50. That's plenty. Okay. Default none, default none. It could be null. Let's scroll over this way. I want this to be index primary. Okay. Primary, fine. Oh, that's it. The primary key, that's the primary key. Go. Okay. And let's see, move column, no, virtuality. I think that's about it. Collation. Let's see what this, I just leave everything default. So we've got an ID integer. It's going to be the primary key. AI, auto increment. That's an important one. Auto increment that bad boy. And then Okay, and then item is a varchar. That's going to be the name, right? The item. And count. All right. Now that you just leave you can put comments in here. NODB is the engine. Fine. It's not very complicated. And just go ahead and hit save. So now we have our database with our table, right? Let's go ahead and click on home inventory, export. So now we're going to export the scripts for the home inventory database. And really there's going to be one big honking script. Okay. So, but you have to go into custom to get all the good stuff. So the format's going to be, so we're going to have the database generate an SQL script to export this database. Save output to a file name. So the name of the file will be home inventory. Character set UTF-8, fine. No compression. Export tables as separate files. No, I'll leave them all in there. We're just going to extract some of the code from the big script and stick them in our own files, right? So that's fine. View output as text. That's fine. Skip tables bigger than. Nope. Display comments. Sure. Include a time. Nope. Don't need that. Display foreign key or disable foreign key checks. No. Export views as tables. No. For this, none. Database system or older. Yeah, database system or older MySQL server. No, that's fine. Okay. So I want to add the create statements, add the drop statements, add the if exists, or if not exists, right? So we get an example of that. Use a simple view, create procedures. There's no procedures in our database, but you would do the same thing. Okay, so syntax to use when inserting data. Yep, that's fine. Dump binary columns as hexadecimal notation. No, okay, that's fine. So everything is pretty much, like I say, I'm going to review one more time. To export the database, you want to check your database, go to Export tab, click on the Custom radio button, Format SQL, select everything. We have no data in our database. But if we did have data, it would export some of that stuff. We can create that fairly easy, even if you don't know SQL very much. Okay, and then just hit go when you're ready. You know, the nice thing about that is if you screw it up the first time, you could always go back and try again. So now we have this database, and I'm going to move this inventory SQL. Oh, it's in my downloads folder. I'm just going to right click, and I'll just show it in the Finder here. Now, let me see. I'm going to open with, I'll open it with Sublime Text. There we go. Cancel. It's asking me to update. So let me make this text bigger so you can see it better. Tell me when. Okay, right about there. Okay. So I can. All right. So this is what you get when you export the database. You get a big old honking file with everything in it. There was a thing that to export. If you have a ton of tables, you might want to export them as separate files, but I usually generally have one create tables file, right? So in other words, I've got a create tables.sql, which will have all the tables in there. And of course it depends. Now, as the database evolves, there may be in like a version 2 of the database, there may be a individual create tables or alter tables, right? Like you're going to create a new table, you can just call it create, data, name the SQL file what you're actually doing. In this case, I'm just creating version 1, so all the create tables, and there's only one in this case, will be in a create tables SQL file. which is perfectly fine. Now, the one thing you got to notice is how this script is actually working. So this is comments. You could copy them over if you wanted to. But it's got set mode, start transaction, set time, right? So I'm going to copy this, right? Command C. Let's start with create the database. Okay, we're going to start with create the database. And so I'm just going to copy this. And I'm going to go to, well, actually, you could put this code in all your statements. So create database. I'm going to put that there. So it sets the mode, starts the transaction, set the time zone 00, right? And then go back here, and this stuff is commented out. You could put this stuff if you wanted to. Okay. And just hit Control C. Oops, wrong window. Put this right here. Okay. Home inventory. Now this is just the create database script, right? And then go back to the file. And then at the bottom, right, we have the commit. And then you got this other stuff down here. So Command C. Oh, wrong table. And then copy. Now we have a create database. So create database, if not exists, it gives us all the code. I'm going to close this window here and then save this file. But the structure is this. This stuff here, and that's start the transaction, and then the commit. This stuff is boilerplate. I'd say all this stuff here is boilerplate. And if your database, at some point you may have to execute these scripts, but these look like they're commented out. Okay. But I put them in there anyway. And then this is obviously a comment. I'll just keep the comments, and then this is a demarcate. This is just another comment line. All right. So that's the create database. Now we can go to the drop database. Let me just save this. Let's go to drop database. Oop, go up here. Drop database. And I'm going to go back to this right here. So we need this. Boilerplate stuff. And just come on down, grab the boilerplate, which is it's actually everything past commit. Copy that into the script. Now, we can take a look at how it's actually dropping the table. Copy that statement and paste it here. Drop database if exists. Home inventory. Okay. So we're dropping the database. So we got two scripts. Well, if they work, we'll see. But this is pretty much it. So each script, you're going to copy the boilerplate code. Okay. And make sure that you've got your start transaction and your commit, right? Because you're going to go drop the database, commit, create the database, commit, create the tables, commit, create the user, commit, insert the test data, commit. Okay, so after each script, you're gonna start a transaction, execute the SQL code, and then commit that transaction. Now let's turn our attention to the table. Now we can say, this is our drop table. I'm just going to copy that again. And let's start with the drop table. Everything's always up here, except for the one I need. Or maybe I just can't see it. Well, I don't need the drop. See, I don't need a drop table. The reason you don't need a drop table is when you drop the database, everything gets dropped, right? Boom. So I don't need a drop table statement. So I don't need that. Let me just go to create table. Okay, create tables. So back to the script. Copy my transaction start boilerplate. And put that right there, up at the top. Come on down. Grab the bottom boilerplate code. Put that right there. And then go to the script and look for create table. Copy this, like that. And stick that right there in the middle. Boom. So, create table, if not exists, items, ID int 11, not null, auto increment. Item varchar, and this should have a primary key ID right there. So there's your primary key set right there. Item varchar 50, count item int 11, not null. Primary key ID. Okay, save that. Now we're going to turn our attention to, we have the create database, create tables, drop the database. Okay, drop the user. The user is separate from the database. So we'll have a drop user and a create user. And then we have an insert test data. We'll actually take a look at that and we can create that by hand. But you know what we can do? Let's go ahead and just add the boilerplate so we can get that out of the way, because all these need this here, right here. So create user. It doesn't matter which one you work on. Insert test data. Drop, let's see, create user, drop user. And then let's go get the footer stuff, or the commit, this stuff here. All right, so boom, save, create database, create user, paste it, save, insert test data. Okay, now we're ready for the user. We go to the database. So we've got the database created. Let's go ahead and come up here. User accounts. So what I did was when you're here, you're in the home, whatever the database is that you've selected. Okay. To go to the top level, you click on the server. And at least in PHP MyAdmin, that brings you to the top level, which is where you get this user accounts. And I'm going to create a new user, add user. And it brings you to this window. So use text field. It'll be home, at least for this case, right? I'm using home inventory user. Any host is fine. Password, none. No password. No password. Native MySQL. Create data. No, I don't want to create the database with the same name. Grant all privileges. Yes, I'm doing that because I just, we're not worried too much about individual things. But, really, your user for your database should be able to read the database and read from the database, insert from the database, right? But I'm just checking everything right here. And then go. So I've created that user. Now, whether this user works or not, we don't know. However, I'm just going to copy. Let's see here. Let's see. I'm just going to copy this SQL code right here. And see. So this is my create user SQL. Just come right here. That's one big old honking line there, isn't it? Let's go back this way. I think I can break this up. Oh, maybe here. No. So, oh yeah, that's another thing too. You see this? Create user home inventory identified with MySQL native password as blah, 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 as 3 asterisks here. Actually, I don't want a password. I'm going to have to edit that. Grant all privileges on star to home inventory, require none with grant option. Oh, I see what you're saying right there. Okay. But the important part is here's a semicolon. So you're breaking this up on the semicolon here. Okay. I think I can break this up like this. We'll find out soon enough whether or not all this works. So there we go. Okay. Save that. Now let's work on the drop user. So drop user. I'm just going to look at drop database. Drop database. Let's just go ahead and copy that. Go to drop user, stick that in there, and just change the name. Here, drop user. If exists, home inventory user. Save. Okay, so we have a set of scripts. Whether or not they work. Now, you could probably just like test everything all at once, right? But let's just go over what we have here. We have a create database. Well, first off, we have the drop database. So the order they're going to be executed is drop database first, and how they're going to be executed in the initialize database shell script, which we're going to turn our attention to here next. And it simply says, look, if this database exists, drop the database. If it exists, home inventory. So we're going to drop that database. If it doesn't exist, it's not going to do anything, which is fine. Then we're going to drop the user. So drop user if exists. Now this isn't showing up here. So that might give us an error. Let's see what it says here. Drop user. I'll leave it like that. If it gives me an error, then we'll go back and fix it. But this is kind of like a real world thing, right? You'd be like pulling these scripts, creating them. Now, let's go ahead and turn our attention to initialize the database. So this is a bash script. And the first thing I do is I'll put a comment up here like I want it first off. I'm going to be logging. Of course, logging, we're going to put that in a little bit later. We're going to first be concerned about just trying to get the scripts to execute, and then we'll go back to and add the logging to the file. But the first thing I want to do here is I want to create the logs directory if it does not exist. Okay, and the reason why is, let's say if there's no logs and you push, there's no log files in the logs directory, and you commit this project, let's say, to GitHub, Git's not going to push an empty directory. So then when someone checks out your code and tries to execute and you're trying to log to a directory that doesn't exist, you'll get an error. And it's things like that that like really discourage beginners, right? When your code doesn't work because of some, little thing that you didn't think about. So I'm just going to sit here and go, I know there's better ways to do this, right? It may be more bulletproof, but I'm just going to say make dir -p logs. Okay. So this assumes that it's running from this directory, and then it's going to create a directory called logs, right? It's running. So this script's running from the database directory, and it's just going to create a logs directory inside the database directory. And, but first, I'm going to let the user know what I'm doing. I'm going to say echo So this is a comment, and this is an echo that's going to go out to the console. And then if this logs directory exists, this thing's not going to do anything, or that make dir is not going to do anything. So then the next thing I want to say is echo deleting old log files. And then rm -f, force it, logs / everything. Just go in there with vehemence and delete everything in that logs directory. And then I can get busy. So what I do to create the date is I assign a value. I create a variable. Okay. And I just use whatever today's date is in the computer. And then I just echo $D. Okay. And now I go echo. So I'm gonna create a output to the console as each script gets executed. So echo $D. And then quote dropping the database. And then I'm going to execute MySQL. This is where the rubber meets the road here. MySQL. Input to that MySQL the database script. So db version _1 / drop database.sql. Okay, so we have a drop _ database.sql. So it's just going to take that script and execute it. That's how you do it with MySQL. So MySQL, and then the less than key, right, is going to send that script to the MySQL command and execute it. Okay, so let's go ahead and just test that piece right there, right? So I have, so save this file. Now the next thing you want to do in order to get this file to work is you want to change the mod to executable, right? And let me show you what happens if you didn't do that, right? Because this is one of those things where a lot of folks who aren't, really like super duper heavy experienced with Linux or Bash, right? Or, Unix like operating systems. But first, we have our home inventory database. It's in the database, and we're going to drop it, right? So this script should drop that database. So we're just going to test this one script. But to do that, we're going to pull up. I'm going to change. So cd tilde. I'm going to pull up here so you can see what I'm doing. In my computer, I have a dev folder and then dev.database. And then change to home directory. And then change to the database directory. And there's my initialized database script. So if I just try to run that /initialize. I'm in the database. Okay. Initialize database.sh. If I try to run this, it should give me an error because it says it's not executable. So it says permission denied. Fine. So chmod +x initialize database.sh. So the command is chmod +x is make it an executable script, then the name of the script. Now, when I come back here and I execute it, it should run. So we should see at least dropping the database. Okay. And now, this is typical programming, right? It says, what? MySQL command not found. Well, that makes sense, right? Because it's not freaking SLQ, it's SQL. You guys are probably screaming at the screen, right? At the YouTube video. I don't blame you. You can send me some hate mail, rick@pulpfreepress.com. I love to hear it, even if it's like, hey, pull your head out of your booty, ding dong. All right, so save that file. All right, now, well, oops, hit the wrong thing. Let's go back to the terminal. We can close this script. We're done with the main script, right? We used it, abused it, wrote it like a horse. It's all sweaty. We can put it away. So let's run that script again. Okay, so initialize database. It said dropping the database. Now let's go check phpMyAdmin and refresh. And that database is in fact gone. So now let's go ahead and add the create database script to initialize database. So I'm just going to copy this. I'm just going to copy those two. And I'm going to come down here to the next line. Now, when you copy and paste and edit, you could still like really destroy yourself. So creating database. Creating database. So create database. So what I did was I just copied the two statements, echo and MySQL. So MySQL is spelled correctly. Create database. Now I should be able to run these two scripts. Let's just go back to your console. Like once you got this stuff sorted out, it's really the turnaround is fast, right? As long as you can figure out which window you're working in, and that's what I was trying to grab this one. I like to keep my windows a little unoverlapped. All right. So go ahead and do that, and we should see 2. Now there was no errors because an error would have written out to the console. Let's go refresh phpMyAdmin, and we have our home inventory. So if we expand it, now we didn't create the tables. We just created the database. So obviously, we could either create the user. Let's go ahead and create the tables. We'll put the user in there in a bit, all right? Because the user is separate from the database. We can get the database script sorted out, and then we can put in the user scripts in a bit. So again, copy. And we're going to create the tables. Creating tables. Create tables. Let's execute the script. It says no. Oh, that's a good point. So the create tables SQL has a flaw in it, which is easily fixed, but it says, hey, no database is selected. So in other words, let's go to create tables. I'm just saying, hey, create tables. But there was a very important thing back there in that other script. Let's go ahead and open that up again. So let's just go to Sublime Text, File, Open Recent. Okay, I don't see it show up there. So let me go to my downloads here. Actually, you know what? We're so used to going through there. I can just do Sublime, SUBL, and then tilde slash. See what I'm doing here. If you got Sublime Text on your machine, go to your home directory, downloads, and then home inventory.sql. So open Sublime Text with that file. That's the way to do it. So we're just going to look here for the clue. Create database if not exist. Oh, use home inventory. Right there. Use home inventory. Command C. Now we need to put that in any script. All right. So I'm creating the table. So we don't need it in the drop, right? We're saying drop the database. Boom. All the database stuff is gone. Create the database. We've just created the database. Now when we do something in the database, we need to tell it use home inventory. Okay. So we're using the home inventory, and we're going to need the same thing for our insert test data. Use home inventory. Okay. Now let's test that script again. Save it. Make sure everything is saved. Create tables is saved. Everything is saved. Let's go back to here. So now we were already seeing the benefit of having scripts, right? Because we're making mistakes, we're fixing things, and then we're just re-executing the script. Now it says variable character set client can't be set to the value of null. So creating tables. So I'm on line 120.31. Line 17. This is in the creating tables. So let's go to the create tables, line 17. Oh, down here. Oh, that is doing something. Is that doing something? Well, okay. Variable, character set client can't be set. Oh, character set client can't be set to the value of null. Okay. Hang on one second. Okay, let's go back to here. Not null. Auto increment. Not null. Not null. Oh, you know what? What's the difference here? Here, I don't have this, right? So let's go back to, let's just make sure here. I don't have it there either, but I have it here. So let's copy this. There's obviously something going on here that's important. So let's create the user. That's what's missing here. That's not even the problem, but for this script, that seems to work. I haven't tried to create the user yet, but we're going to run into that problem. So create tables, same thing. Because the error is here. The error that we're seeing is thrown here. So evidently, man, these things, I wish I knew more about MySQL. I have to look that up. Insert test data, same thing. So those are very important. So for each of our scripts, let's go ahead and save. Save. These commands are quite important. So create database, it's there. Create tables, it's there now. Create user, it's there. Create, it's there. I'm anal retentive. Drop user, same thing. Insert test data. Okay, so I think we're covered. We are covered. Now, let's save. Make sure everything's saved. It'll tell us if we're making a mistake. Let's run that again. Okay, no problems. So we created the table. Let's go check the database. Home inventory. Right? Let's expand. I should be seeing, let me refresh. That's the problem. All right, now okay. So I got the items table. Now let's add some items to the items table. Okay. Now you could add something in there and then export the script to get the boilerplate code, but this is actually a pretty easy SQL stuff, right? If you're beginning with SQL, so insert test data. This is pretty easy. We're just going to say insert into, I like to capitalize the commands. Insert into items. So we're inserting into the items table. And then name the columns, item, count, and then values. And this could be capitalized too. And then we're just going to do, I'll say truck, and then a comma, and then a 1 for count. Now, you could add a couple of these things, but let's just try this and see if it works, and then we can just copy and then create a bunch of test data. So let's go back to the scripts. So notice now, we're not messing around. We're dropping the database, creating the database, creating the table, and now we're going to try to insert some test data. Oh, you know what? We didn't insert anything because we got to go back to the initialized database and we got to call insert test data. So copy this. So you got to go back to your initialize database, inserting test data. Whoa. Inserting test data. And then create the right script. So insert test data .sql. Now let's go back to your scripts and execute. You have an error. Check the manual that corresponds. Oh, commit. I think I know what the issue is. Use the right syntax near commit. Now this is a tricky one, right? Because you're going to be looking at commit and you're like, what? So let's go back here to the insert test data, and I need to add a semicolon. That's what's missing. All right. You're going to make those mistakes, man. You watch. But the beautiful thing is you have scripts, so you can just re-execute. It says home inventory dot item items. Okay, that's a problem. So come up in here. Got to go back. Insert into the items table. All right, command save. This is like live coding, man. You see how fast that turnaround was? Oh, mistake. Correct. Re-execute scripts. Success. That's what you're aiming for, right? That quick turnaround for your development. Yeah, okay, so yes, there's an investment in time of figuring out how to do it, creating the scripts, right? But if you try to grunt this stuff out manually over the course of your development project, you're going to waste so much more time than you did learning a new trick, right? And that's always the case. It's always beneficial to learn a new trick to save time down the road. Even if you spend a day just figuring out how to do something new, it's going to save you months and perhaps many months of manpower when you learn the new trick, right? Okay. So now we've got the one. So now what is it? It's just a game of copy and paste. And we can just change, right? So I'm going to say car, right? Mac Pro. I'll say 2. Camera. Nikon. Okay. Just whatever you feel like entering into the database as test data. Sleeping bag. Okay. So let's test it. All right, inserting test data. Let's go to phpMyAdmin, refresh. That's an important thing with phpMyAdmin, and there's our test data in our items. But it didn't just add the test data. It dropped the database, recreated the database, created the table, and then inserted the database. Now let's create the user. Okay. Now, technically, we can put the user scripts at the bottom, right? I'll just do that, because we're not relying on the user to insert the data. It's your account that's inserting the test data, right, into this database, because you got omnipotent power, just like the home inventory user, right? Because you're creating this, you're executing the scripts, you're creating the database, right? So that's it for the insert test data. Let's turn our attention to create the user. And let's just see if this works, right? Something tells me there might be an issue here, but the only way to find out is to run it and try it. So what do? We got to go to our initialized database, and we're going to add, well, we're just going to copy this. And we're going to say creating user. Create user. So let's try this. Okay. We have a problem with the password, right? Of course. So what we're going to do here is we're going to go back here to create user. And the problem is here. I'm going to get rid of that. So what I did was I just generated that. I got rid of that identified with. Let me just see if that runs. Operate. Oh, okay. Create user failed for home inventory at line 10. Let's take a look at line 10. So it's right here. So there's got to be something there. So let's go back. So let's go back to the database. And let's take so we're going to create the user. So I'm going to come up here. User accounts. It's in there. Oh, I didn't drop the user. I wonder if that's the issue. Let's go ahead and drop this user. Okay. Now I can just put the drop user in there. I'm going to put the drop user script and then the create user. So let's go back to here, initialize database. And then before this, I'm going to say dropping user. Drop user. Okay. Drop user. And then create the user. Let's run that and see what happens. No problems. So that the error, create user failed for home inventory user, that was was caused because the home inventory user already existed. Okay, so now which is fine. You could leave these in this order. You know, I like to drop the database, drop the, you know, drop the user, and then create the database, create the tables, or create the user, insert test data, like that, right? And that's just my personal preference. We can leave these, I'm just going to leave them like this. Now, and then we'll get into how we actually write the logs, the logging information to the log files. Okay, so hang on in the next section. All right, our scripts are working great. We can recreate, drop the database and recreate everything, create the user. We get no errors. When we go to PHP MyAdmin and refresh, we see the changes, the user is created, no password, home inventory. We worked out all the kinks in the scripts. Now we get a report of the execution of the scripts on the console, but the logs are not being written. So we're going to write, now what we want to do is for big, you know, like scripts with a lot of stuff in it, you really want to preserve the execution of those scripts and any error messages, especially that you create that are generated. Okay. You want to capture that to a log file. So we have a logs directory. So we're going to go back, and this is pretty easy to do. You're only concerned with the MySQL, right? This, you could write this too, right? You could say dropping the database. We'll do everything. So what we're going to do is we're going to redirect the standard output and the standard error to a log file. Now for dropping the database, that's not going to be going to the standard error. That's just writing out to the console. That's the standard output. So we're going to do a pipe command, pipe, and we're going to call T. I recommend you look up T. It's a great command. T, and then what it does, it just like, hey, write stuff out to a log file. Logs / drop. And then the name of whatever script you're running. And then log file. Okay. So what we want to do is, like, if we're doing the drop database SQL, we just want to name our log file whatever the name of the database file or script file is. So we're going to write this. We're going to say dropping database append to that file, or write to that file. Okay. And then for here, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to say, except for we're going to do something a little different. We're going to say, take the standard error, to redirect to the and one, and then take that output, pipe it to T-A logs. So what I'm going to do is, instead of typing all this stuff and boring you guys to tears, I'm just going to, because this will be the same for everything, right? I'm going to this log. Actually, let me add this to it. For all these other commands, for the actual SQL commands, that's going to all be this. That's boilerplate right there. So I'm just copying it to the SQL command output, and then drop database log. Okay, and then for, let me just finish these first, and then I'll go back to the echoes. This is create database. Create database.log, and then this is create table. Tables. .log. This is insert test data. .log. This is drop user. Drop user log, and then this is create user .log. And then for the echo statements, just do this. We're piping to T, piping to T, piping to T, and pipe to T, and then drop data. This will be create database. Okay, and then this will be create tables. Because really what I'm doing here, right, I know these statements are kind of jammed up, is that echo belongs to the following, like that, right? So, I'm sorry. So this echo dropping the database, and then that's the error is going to be written out to the drop database log. Okay. And then there's an error right there, period. Okay, so insert test data. So insert test data.log, insert test data.log, drop user .log, and create user .log. Oops, I can't hit the right key. Okay, so that takes care of our logging. I recommend, if you get some spare time, figure out, like, look up this redirection, right? Because it's really helpful in your bash scripting. So command save. Now, we're going to get, what we'll see is we'll see these echoes unless we get an error. And so I'll force an error so you can see what an error looks like. So initialize database. Okay, now you see over here, I don't know if you saw that happen, but the log files were obviously created. Now, let me erase them all. rm logs /star. Okay, so you see the logs, the log file, the log directory is no longer, so you see logs directory is empty. Let me run the scripts again, and you'll see that the log files will be created. Okay, boom, the log files got created. So if we click on one of those log files, we'll see, okay, it's creating the database with our timestamp. Now let's go ahead and open up create tables. Now let's go ahead and insert test data. I'm sorry, into the DB script, insert test data. And let's just go ahead and remove a semicolon and see what the error looks like when it gets reported. So I'm going to run the scripts. Boom, there's your error. You have an error in your SQL syntax. Check the manual that corresponds. You know, how hard can it be for the SQL people to go, oh, you know what? You're missing a friggin' semicolon on line 2. Right? This is the hard part for beginners, is you're looking at these error codes, you're like, what the heck is the problem? All right. So anyway, we evidently have a problem. So let's check the insert test data log and see if it got written. Yes. So the error got written there, right? So you got your timestamp for, like, okay, I'm inserting test data. Okay. So let's see if it overwrites it. I think it's just going to write it again to it. We'll see. So let's say we kept on executing, right, the script. No, I think what it does, every time it runs, it's going to delete those log files. That's right. We could care less about the old log files, right? Every time this script runs, it's going to delete those scripts. So initialize database, right? Same error. Drop user. Okay. Yeah, so it deletes the log files every time you run it. Okay. And that's it. Honestly, let's go back and fix that error, right? So we're going to go insert testdata.sql and just add that semicolon back in there. So a couple things. The create tables, that was fine. Create the user, that's a long statement. So create user, grant all privileges. So it was okay to break this multi-line, this really long SQL line into like on, at least you have syntax highlighting, and it when it generates the scripts for the create user, the main commands are in all caps, right? So if you split that script along those, maybe the require is one too, but I'm not sure. Grant to, none, grant, right? You can break it up along those lines and probably more lines, right? I just have to play around with it. But the nice thing about these scripts is, you know what? You can make a mistake and you can fix it and then rerun the scripts and you're golden. So let's rerun this script to create everything. And the final version of the database is we have a home inventory database. It has items and it has test data in that items table. We have our user automatically created. And if you have any code that requires a home inventory user, you can log in, you can access, you can run that code, and it should be able to query this database. Okay. And that's it. That's how you script a database from scratch with minimal knowledge of how you actually use SQL, right? You're going to have to know a little bit about it. But then from here on out, you can either do a couple different ways. You can create your database. And then if you wanted to modify or add items, right, you can go ahead and you can modify the database manually, export the database, pick out the piece of scripts you want, or, as your knowledge of SQL grows, you can just manually go in here. Let's say you wanted to create another table, right? You could create another table. If you don't know how foreign key, relationships are created, you can create the foreign key structure in your in PHP, MyAdmin, or whatever graphical user interface MySQL tool you have. Create all those relationships, export that database or those tables, and figure out how that's written in SQL. So it's a great learning tool as well. And that's it. That's how you script a database. If you have questions, comments, concerns, hit me up at rick@palfreypress.com. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope it was helpful. Let me know in the comments below. Thank you. Have a great day.